In the end, we will learn 7 major verbal stems in Hebrew. These are called binyanim. You can see that the im is the im you already know from the masculine plural. The singular of a verbal stem then is a binyan. These stems all will provide a certain vowel pattern and then will add various prefixes, letters that come before, or suffixes, letters that come after, to the Hebrew root. The basic verbal stem in Hebrew is called the qal. The qal is the most common verbal stem, covering approximately 2/3 of all verbs in our Old Testament. For a qal perfect verb, the lexical form, in other words, the form that you would look up in your lexicon to find the gloss of a Hebrew verb, is the third person masculine singular form. In other words, it's the form that in English we would say with he. It's not first person, I or me, nor is it second person, you. Instead, it's third person, he, she, or it, and then the masculine form, he. The perfect conjugation of the verb, which is the first of several conjugations we will look at within the qal, is accomplished by adding suffixes, letters that follow, to this lexical form. In fact, because the perfect form is dominated by these suffixes, it is sometimes even called the suffix conjugation. In Hebrew, typically, verbal paradigms are illustrated with the root katal, to kill, kof, tet, lamed. This is not actually a particularly common word in Biblical Hebrew, but it is useful for illustrating paradigms because each of these 3 letters gives no surprises. There will be, as we've mentioned once before, many weak verbs that we discuss in Hebrew, verbs where one or more of the consonants involved have a peculiarity. In fact, we've already noticed a couple such peculiarities, the tendency of nun to assimilate and the tendency of guttural consonants to take a vocal schwa. Most of the remainder of weak consonants, letters that have some other peculiarity, will be held off until the second half of this grammar. That is so we can concentrate on learning the Hebrew verbal system well before we get into the myriad complexities of what happens with different weaknesses in different letters. Katal then is a very useful form because none of these 3 letters have any such peculiarities. Unlike Romance languages, and unlike English, in which we typically learn our verbs in order from the first person to the third person, Hebrew verbal paradigms are typically taught beginning with the third person masculine singular form, the lexical form. This is both because it's the form that is easiest to look up in the lexicon, and because it is the form which shows the least alteration. In a sense, you can think of the rest of the paradigm as having been built upon the third masculine singular form. The Hebrew perfect paradigm has third person, he, she, it, second person, you, feminine or singular, and a first common singular. In other words, when you speak of a first person, the paradigm does not distinguish between whether that person is masculine or feminine, because in a sense, you don't need to. If someone is speaking and they say I, other information lets you know whether that person is masculine or feminine. You're not worried that someone will confuse the two. In the plural forms, the third plural form is also common. In other words, if you say they as a bunch of men, or they as a bunch of women, or they as a mixed group of male and female, there is no distinction. It is a third common plural form. The second person plural forms, what in the South you would use the word y'all to convey, do distinguish gender. Second masculine plural, you, a bunch of men killed, or second feminine plural, you, a bunch of women killed. Now this may raise the question, what if you have a mixed group, some men and some women together? And the rule of the language is that the masculine form is the unmarked form. What that means is a mixed group of men and women will receive the masculine plural form. In fact, the presence of one single man in the group would cause the form of the verb that was used to be the second masculine plural form. Then again, in the first person form, you have a common plural. If you say we, you only have a single form. You will see that to convey this information, you use a very similar vowel pattern on the root, and then you add a suffix. So the paradigm for the Cal Perfect goes as follows. Katal, which is the third masculine singular form, he killed. Katala, the third feminine singular form, she killed. Katalta, the second masculine singular form, you, masculine singular, killed. Katalt, the second feminine singular form, you, feminine singular, killed. And katalti, that I killed. In the plural, you have katalu, they killed. Kutaltim, you, masculine plural, killed. Kutaltin, you, feminine plural, killed. And katalnu, we killed. Together, these forms make the Cal Perfect paradigm. This is a paradigm you will need to memorize and be able to reproduce at any point. You notice that there's a clear suffix that indicates each of these forms. So to do the paradigm again, katal, katala, katalta, katalt, katalti, katalu, kutaltim, kutaltin, katalnu. Notice that for three forms, the second masculine singular, the first common singular, and the first common plural, the accent is not on the final syllable of the form. A Hebrew perfect, such as these Cal Perfects, can be an entire sentence in itself. Because the Hebrew verb encodes a subject, you do not need an explicit subject. Katal is in fact, or at least could be, a complete sentence. He killed. Katala could be a complete sentence. She killed, etc. You will note that as well, what a paradigm really is, you might say, is a cheat sheet. It's a way to learn what any given verb ought to be translated, or at least glossed, whether or not you even know what the root letters mean. So when you memorize this Cal Perfect paradigm, you effectively have memorized how to deal with any other Hebrew root. When you see katal, it gives you the same information as when you see saraf. The root letters have changed, so the gloss will change, but you are again seeing a third masculine singular form. In this case, he burned. Likewise then, with those root letters, if you were to see raf, tim, your knowledge of the paradigm would be enough to help you figure out what form you have here. The tim at the end matches the second masculine plural form, and the raf matches the vowel pattern of that form. So if you know kutaltim is a second masculine plural, you also know that suraftim is a second masculine plural. All you have to do is go to your lexicon and look up sin, resh, peh, and you're able to find out that this would be glossed as y'all burned. Likewise, if you were to find shamarti, I miswrote that, let me write again. Shamarti, you again can look at the ending. This is a first common singular ending, T. It's the same vowel pattern. If you look up shin, mem, resh in your lexicon, you find out that this is I kept or I guarded. So by learning your CalPerfect paradigm well, you'll be able to interpret any CalPerfect, at least as of right now, that has strong root letters that you find in the text. For that reason, you want to memorize this paradigm. Most students find that the most effective way to memorize the paradigm is to get a small handheld whiteboard and dry erase marker, and to both speak out loud and write the paradigm again and again. Katal, katala, katalta, katalt, katalti, katalu, kutaltim, kutaltin, katalnu. You should do this over and over and over again until you can reproduce the paradigm at will. After you are able to reproduce the paradigm at will, you should also attempt to take different verbal root letters through the same thing. Once you are able to reproduce the paradigm for katal, try with saraf and see if you can apply the vowel patterns and endings to a different set of Hebrew letters. There are a couple quirks to note. One you have already learned. We indicated in the last chapter that when a guttural consonant has a vocal schwa, or should have a vocal schwa, the nature of the guttural, that it's pronounced back in the throat, resists a vocal schwa. Instead, you will see a schwa that is a compound schwa. That will impact the second masculine plural and second feminine plural forms, which typically have a vocal schwa under the first syllable. Secondly, as you will see here, remember that the Hebrew writing system will not tend to write the same consonant in a row. Instead, it will tend to write the consonant once and provide a dagesh forte. This will be the case then with roots that end in a tav, such as karat, to cut. When the root ends in a tav, and the suffix also has a tav, that tav will only be written once, and the presence of the doubled letter will be indicated by the dagesh forte. So the paradigm for karat would be karat, karata, karata, karat, karati, karatu, karatim, karatin, karatnu. As you hear it, you can recognize, or will be able to recognize with practice, that it is the exact same pattern of vowels and endings. However, in the writing system, the tav is only written one time. For instance, karata. When this happens, the dagesh is a dagesh forte, and the letter is doubled. For instance, karatim stands for k, rat, tim. But simply for the convention of speed and saving space, these two tavs are only written one time, and the dagesh is a dagesh forte. We also learned in the previous chapters that the letter nun is a very weak consonant, and that unless a vowel intervenes, it will be assimilated into the following consonant. That assimilation causes a doubling of the following consonant and the presence of a dagesh forte. A verb in the CalPerfect that ends in a nun, then, will often see its third nun, the last letter of the root, assimilated into the suffix. The Hebrew verb natan, typically glossed as to give, therefore has the following paradigm: natan, natana, natata, natat, natati, natanu, nitatim, nitatin, natanu. Notice that in any of the cases where a vowel does not intervene before the suffix, the nun of the root, the third letter of the root, is assimilated. We do not have natanta, we have natata. And the dagesh in the suffix becomes a Dagesh forte, indicating the doubling of the root. As you do your memory paradigms, you do not need to do a memory paradigm for Natan or for Shabbat. You do, however, need to be able to recognize what is happening in the verbal form.